computer.
Yes.
Hello, BookTube.
Hello, BookTube.
Hello. It's Roz of Scally Dandling About the Books.
And Tilly from Tilly's Shelf.
And it's that time of the month when Tilly and Roz do our Discussing Drama video.
We always intend to do it a little bit earlier in the month, and it always just kind of slips by, and we get to the end of the month, we have to kind of cram it in a bit.
Yeah, and then we say to each other, oh, when can we do it? And she works shifts, you know, so
it's difficult.
It's yeah. Anyway, August is, as we all know, Women in Translation Month, amongst other things, but that's, you know, one of the lovely things about August. So we really wanted to read a play by a woman that has been translated into English, and so we found Saying Yes by Griselda Gambaro, who's an Argentinian playwright, and it's I read it in English in translation by Sebastian Doggart, and Tilly, because she's much more accomplished than me, read it and in Spanish and in English, so which was a real bonus. So
well, after reading it in Spanish, I had to read it in English just to make sure I'd understood the ending right, because it's a bit of an odd ending, and I was kind of like, did that really happen? Is that actually right? So yeah, I had to just double check my comprehension.
Yes, I think there is something, well, we're going to use the words absurd and grotesque in the course of this review, and I can imagine reading that in Spanish, you would have been thinking, what the hell am I reading? Is this real? Am I understanding this?
What's going on? It's a weird play. Like, we've read some odd plays together, yes, but I would say this is probably up there. Yeah.
This I think is our oddest, and you know, we did do a Beckett play not that long ago, and this.
That's the play that this most reminds me of, is Happy Days by Beckett, because it's got that thing where one character kind of talks a lot and one character doesn't talk very much, and you're not really sure what's going on or why they're there or what they're doing, but it's all got greater, deeper meanings.
Yes, and the other thing it has in common, I guess, is that it's quite static.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah, it's not a play with
fixed in one
lots
spot.
Of coming and going, and you know, not lots of entrances and exits like you get in some plays. No, this is just the two of them, really. So she wrote it in 1974. It was first performed in 1981 for reasons that I think you might explain in a minute, and then the translation was done in 1996 by, as I say, Sebastian Doggart. And the interesting thing about the translation to me was that he did, I suppose, like a kind of a basic translation and then refined the translation in performance, which I think for a play that's a really good approach, I guess. And it did, in that sense, it didn't read like a translation, it read like a play. Yeah. But do you want to tell us a bit more about the lovely Griselda, who's such an interesting person?
Yeah, Griselda, she is a very interesting person. She's still alive now. I think she's 93, and she's still been putting out books into like 2011. So she didn't retire early or anything. She's put out a huge body of work, and one of her main specialisms has been theatre over the years. So she wrote this play in 1974, amongst other works that she was working on at the time. And then her novel, Ganarse la Muerte, my spoken Spanish is my real weak point, which is like to win yourself death, I think, was was banned by the dictatorship at that time, which I believe was the AAA. And then she went into exile following that, and she was blacklisted by the following dictatorship that came on after the AAA. So you kind of have to understand this work and her other works in the context of the political and upheaval and difficulties that Argentina was going through the middle of the 20th century, and the repeated successions of different styles of dictatorship, I suppose. and a lot of, at the time when she wrote this, a lot of assassinations, and a lot of people being disappeared.
Yeah.
Quite bravely, 2 years after she was blacklisted in 1979, she then popped back over to Argentina and had this play put on as part of something called Teatro Abierto, which was, it seems like a very significant moment in Argentinian theatre history, because it involved the collaboration of a huge number of playwrights, actors, scene makers, directors, all of whom gave their time for free, to put on over 21 act plays over the course of a month, and it was hugely successful. They filled their audiences. 5 days in, there was an arson attack on the theatre where they were based. It was burned, destroyed, but it was so popular that they were immediately offered a whole range of other places that they could take their plays to, and they were able to continue to put on these plays. And most of them deal with similar themes to this play, which is things like the abuse of power, the use of things like the education system, or like methods of victimization and submission, and like the ways in which those power abuses were being perpetuated. So quite bold political things, and that was repeated over the next few years until the emergence of democracy. So that Teatro Abierto movement kept going over those few years.
So it's like a classic example of when there's political repression, one of the outlets for a response to that is through the arts. And
the arts that had been kind of, as we've seen with her book being banned, like undermined, and universities had been targeted in some periods, and so they'd been undermined repeatedly, but managed to kind of build back up to this Teatro Abierto movement. And it was so significant that there's been a documentary about it since, and then in 2001 Gambaro was kind of interviewed about it, and I picked a quote from her interview, which I'm going to read in my best English translation. So it's 2001, and she said, Teatro Abierto served to improve us and reunite us in a moment in which in Argentina no one was connected with anyone. So like this idea that they had all been isolated and hadn't been able to share those cultural moments, and Teatro Abierto just opened up the doors and got people back together again. So it seems like a significant moment.
And that's the nature of that kind of political repression, that you don't know who to trust, and you know it does disconnect people, because you never know who's the person that's going to betray you, or you know.
Exactly.
But something like theatre can bring you back together.
So what's the play itself?
Well,
what is it?
What is it?
So it's a one-act play, like we've said.
Yes, it's a one-act play with just 2 characters, the hairdresser and the customer, and it takes place in the barber's salon, as it were, with the barber's chair, you know, the sort of traditional.
This is a picture from I think that first performance of the play, and just to get things really confusing, the guy in the chair is the hairdresser and the guy standing up is the customer.
Because that's basically the plot, is that the customer comes in hoping to get a haircut, and is sort of manipulated and intimidated into instead having to do that for the hairdresser. So it's that feeling of like your government should support you, look after you, and provide for you, and you know there's a social contract between you and your government, and that's flipped on its head.
Completely abused. I just kind of wanted to say, so my book's got an introduction by Rita Gnutzman, and she says that like it's kind of important to note that the hairdresser never orders the man to do anything. He just implies, and the man submits bit by bit by himself, and kind of steps one by one to kind of like appease the hairdresser, because he's so scared of him that he doesn't need to be ordered. He doesn't need to sort of threaten him or tell him. It's like he's sort of saying, oh yes, of course I must do this for you, you know. Yes. Oh yes, I'd rather not do that. Oh no, of course I will do it, you know. It's really interesting. It says like he himself establishes the hierarchy to which he submits.
Yeah.
Like he just kind of soaks in this fear, and I guess it's about kind of power and victimization. And I've read that in some of her later work she was maybe more sympathetic towards the victim, whereas in her earlier work she was kind of, in a way, could be seen as blaming the victim for, like in this case, like that he just steps back and he just takes on the role of the servile role rather than
so he doesn't offer up any resistance. Yes, and you could say, oh, is that what the Argentinian people did? They just let this succession of dictatorships take control.
And the door is part of the scenery, so the door is on set, so the door's never locked. He always has a route out, but he doesn't take it because he's kind of wrapped up in this situation with the hairdresser.
So it's a dialogue between the two of them. And that's it, really. I found myself sort of thinking, does this work as a play? And I thought it really did. Even though it's very simple, there's so much kind of emotional weight in what is a very simple scene and very simple sort of language and dialogue, that I was, although I was mystified, I was very engaged.
And there's a lot of kind of tension that goes into it, and it's basically one long scene of weird increases in tension and weird little moments when you think, this isn't quite right, this is really not right, I'm quite concerned here, and it just gradually builds over the play. And I think if you think of it in that context of being shown at the same time as, like, 3 plays were shown, 3 one-act plays in a day, so 2 plays surrounded it, that were also dealing with similar themes, I think it would work really well in that context.
Which is why it was absolutely, I was flabbergasted when you told me about the American performance of the play.
So there's an interview with
Gambaro.
So I was just thinking Griselda, and I was like, no, that's the first name. There's an interview with Gambaro where she talks about how the play was translated into English and performed in American. She went along. She says she only normally watches her plays once, but because it had been translated, she went to see it in, I think it was in New York, and she says it in kind of like a positive way, like, oh, I was interested to see how the American audience picked up on the more humorous aspects of the play. And you're thinking, is that picking up on the humorous aspects, or is that completely missing the point?
But it just shows, in a different political and social and cultural context, it would become like this kind of social comedy almost of embarrassment and not feeling able, a
bit absurd, a bit, it depends how you play it a lot.
And you could play it for laughs up to a certain point when you get to the ending. Now we're not going to do a spoiler for the ending.
No, definitely not.
But you did say that she had a particular favourite sort of ending for her plays.
So she likes to focus on themes of victims and victimizations and the perpetrators of victimization. There's a word for that in Spanish that there isn't a direct word for in English. The victim makers, I suppose.
Well, what's the word in Spanish?
Hang on, I can't remember. It's
don't worry then.
Something. It's like, you can understand it in context. It's like victimers, I suppose.
Right.
if you translated it directly. And she likes to focus on that dynamic, and her plays typically quite often end, apparently, with the victim screaming, and the scream quite often turning from a scream into a shriek, which apparently represents kind of the animalization of the victim in their state of victimhood. We're not going to tell you what happens at the end of this play, but
what exactly
that's
happens,
just a relevant detail.
But I think if you're an American audience at that point, you'd have thought, no, this is not funny anymore.
I don't know, but then it fits in with kind of, I guess, horror stories that we have. It builds on horror stories that we have around hairdressers. Weirdly. And some of those are seen as, I suppose, chilling, but
also slightly
not quite as dark as this perhaps is.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. We were saying at the beginning of this, we were comparing it with having read Beckett, say, and the sort of theatre of the absurd as being something that, us reading it kind of, that's our reference point, I suppose.
Yeah, that's what we kind of
but actually, in the sort of history of Argentinian drama, there's a different tradition, which is the one that you were saying she sees as where she is sort of drawing on. Yeah.
So when people compared her theatre to theatre of the absurd, she kind of rejected that comparison and pointed to the theatre of the grotesque being like a more Argentinian tradition, and she sees herself as being very, like, clearly being very deeply embedded in that tradition, having grown up like reading and knowing a lot of Argentinian playwrights and authors.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it was interesting to me, this being, Women in Translation Month, that and we discover our ignorance when we do these things. I had not, I suppose, appreciated that there's a very distinct Latin American theatrical tradition, which is actually, very positively different from a sort of North American and European theatrical, tradition. And this is, it's cultural imperialism all over that I'm displaying here. There's you assume perhaps that other countries might have been sort of following on and copying the sort of sort of Anglo-American European sort of, and no, the very, very strong different tradition that to draw on. Yeah.
And I think that's what she means when she says it's not theatre of the absurd, because she's saying, like, this is maybe you recognize some aspects of it, but actually it's really not, because it belongs to this thing that came from Argentina.
So that is always the joy of reading something, choosing to broaden our understanding, I guess, by reading something from somewhere else, and you discover a whole different sort of set of a whole different culture and history. That so that was a real bonus, I suppose, of doing this play, as well as it being in itself an enjoyable play. The language for me was kind of, it's not, this is not a play where the main interest is, oh, well, that's a lovely line or whatever, it's not, that's not what you're looking for.
It's about two normal people. And she was actually I didn't really pick up on this play, but that might be about my grasp of the boss form, but she is one of the playwrights who uses sort of informal Argentinian quite boldly, and including the Voss form, which is a kind of informal form of you. I don't think it happens here, because as I remember it, the man addresses the hairdresser in formal language, and the hairdresser doesn't really address the man at all. So she specifically uses like familiar language that's normal people language, as opposed to artistic language.
And that's a sort of but that's a deliberate artistic decision.
in itself.
Well, this was one of those occasions where I was very pleased that we'd made this choice.
Me too.
Have we said the things that we want to say about it, do you think?
I think so. I think we've said everything. And when I first read this, I was thinking, are we going to think of much to say about this? But actually, the more I read around it, the more I was like, the more my eyes opened to the different aspects of the play. And I'm really glad that going from never having heard of Gambaro, never having heard of never having any idea of sort of Argentinian theatre, from just us saying, let's pick a playwright from somewhere in Latin America. And now I feel like I know quite a lot about her writing and the context that she was working in.
And I knew a bit about Argentinian sort of 20th century politics, I suppose, as you tend to if you're British, because we fought a war with them, amongst other things. But it's that thing of she is sort of probably Argentina's leading woman playwright, and
leading playwright, full stop, I think.
Yeah. And yet, I have to say, I hadn't actually heard of her, so that's a gap in my knowledge filled, which is always good.
Yeah.
And so roll on September's discussing drama. I guess it may well be a Shakespeare play, because
I think that should be kind of
this year. It's not Shake Tube, it's Shake Tember.
I've seen Shake
shifted to being Shake Tember. So thank you to
the bit harder to say than Shake Tube.
I was trying. You saw I was making an effort to
it fits in with like October and all of the
It does. So we haven't yet chosen what our Shake Tember play may be, but that is we will, and we'll see you all in September. Now, can I remember how to stop recording? It's always a bit of a
we'll find out.
Problem. Yeah. Bye.
Thanks for watching.